Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland. Your Sensei Al Bob, that is me, here to greet you and to be your griot to tell you stories. Now, I hit the screen like a big splat on Johnny Boy's channel with a story about the old crone. And that seemed to capture an audience, right? And then I told a few more stories about my life as the dude, right? Meeting, famous folk and not even knowing that they're famous folk and just kind of hanging out with them like they're buds, David Bowie, John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, et al., and way, way more, right? And I got photos to prove it too, so that doesn't seem to sway too much, right? And why is that? Is because the 19th century was the heralding, not the heralding, but the explosion of the modern technological materialist age. Now, we have been materialists since Adam and Eve ate the apple of truth, of good and evil, right? Or the knowledge of, right? And so we've been in this same situation since. And different mystery schools and powerful groups and religions have done their best to try to corner the market on the control of the human experience, of that dynamic that is the human experience. And many people think it's consciousness or the spirit or the soul or any of those things, but you could, as we start to study and understand all our relations, I mean, all the brethren, all the animals, all the plants, as we destroy them very quickly, as we throw them into the trash heap of materialism, that they too have a consciousness. They too have a personality. They too have a intellect. They too use tools. Have language. Have empathy. Have all the rest. And as we study them more and more closely, we start to realize that maybe they might even be superior to us, to the point that they are embracing God's unconditional love and Jesus's unconditional forgiveness, because they're not coming after us. As we obliterate them, they're not really coming after us. I mean, the insect world could put us down, no problem, but they're not. Right? So today I was, before, as I normally do, go and look at what's out there in the world. And I stumbled along on my thread two interesting things, right? So I'm going to start first. Do, 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 do. Uh, you know, Fascism. Fascism. Fascism, right?
Meet Litter Robot, the revolutionary self-cleaning litter box that eliminates the chore of scooping.
Totalitarianism was a word that... So today's video is going to be answering one question, and one question only. And that is, what is fascism? Fascism has to be a strong contender for one of the most loosely understood words in the political lexicon. And in my opinion, that's probably not going to be changing anytime soon. But if you're someone that wants to develop a tighter understanding of it, this video is going to be targeted for you. To date, there have only ever been two governments that have even remotely uncontroversially been considered fascist. And those are the governments of Italy and Germany, established between World War I and World War II. Calling Germany fascist is slightly controversial, but I'm not going to get into that here. In my opinion, Nazi Germany was fascist, and I think that will become clear as I talk about it in the video. But either way, it shouldn't change my conclusions.
Sure.
You should be able to theoretically drop Germany from my analysis here, and my conclusions should still hold up. But I will talk about Germany in this video. So I'm going to mostly cover Italy first and Germany second, but I will to some extent go back and forth between the two for the sake of comparison.
I'm not gonna play
To the surprise of no one, this
but
video will get
you
dark.
guys should go
I'm not going to show anything very graphic,
Ryan,
but I'm also not going to intellectually shy away from the subject matter either.
which is
The subject matter will get dark, especially when we cover Germany. So if you're trying to, I don't know, go on a picnic or something after this, this might not be the video for you.
I'm gonna subscribe to
But
this
for the rest of us, we're going to cover Italy first and Germany second, and then at the end, we're going to circle out and see what we can say about fascism based on that. And yeah, that's the plan.
That's-
So we're going to go back to the time and the place where fascism was invented, which was interwar Italy. After the March on Rome in 1922, Benito Mussolini came into power and became the face of fascism known around the world.
Round?
Mussolini had a background in academia and considered himself something of a philosopher. We're going to get into Mussolini's ideas, but first I think we should get into some of his influences. And a good place to start with that is Gustave Le Bon, whose book The Crowd was of a special interest to Mussolini. By the end of the 1800s, the nature of politics seemed to be changing, and Le Bon believed that civilization was at a turning point. As he wrote, while all our ancient beliefs are tottering and disappearing, while the old pillars of society are giving way one by one, the power of the crowd is the only force that nothing menaces, and of which the prestige is continually on the increase. The age we're about to enter will, in truth, be the era of crowds. What Le Bon is describing is the beginning of mass politics. It was a time when politics were getting less elitist and more populistic. So to gain political power in that context, people would have to spend less time targeting educated people and elites, and more time trying to win the support of everyday people, who would then express their support in a crowd. So he argued that that was making politics more simplistic and more homogenous. Le Bon believed that there was something like a psychological law of the mental unity of crowds, which is this idea that when individuals identify with crowds, they to some extent lose their ability to think for themselves, and they instead think with the crowd. So then you have a crowd of like-minded people, which can then be directed and influenced. So in this analysis, crowd psychology acts as a hypnotizer, and individuals in the crowd are hypnotized. So if an individual becomes swept up in a crowd, then all feelings and thoughts are bent in the direction determined by the hypnotizer. One believed that to sway a crowd didn't require telling the crowd the truth. What it required was telling the crowd what they wanted to hear and appealing to the crowd's emotions. As he put it, the masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. So to gain power in the era of mass politics, it was thought that you would have to simplify your political ideas and win over a crowd of like-minded people that would then express support for them. The best way to do that wouldn't be to be concerned with truth, but rather to emotionally charge your ideas that can get the crowd excited, to tell them illusions that they want to hear. So this is already describing the core assumptions behind fascism. Mussolini believed that if the 19th century was the century of individualism, then the 20th century would be the century of collectivism. Mussolini thought that anyone who wasn't thinking in terms of collectivism and mass politics was going to be left behind in the 20th century.
What do you think?
So by that, he mostly meant liberals who thought individualistically and conservatives who thought aristocratically. So Mussolini described that as dead energy. One thinker he thought did get it right, at least in that regard, was Karl Marx, which I know is a name that most of us were probably not expecting to hear in this video, but there it is. By the beginning of the 20th century, both of the original founders of classical Marxism had died, and adaptations of Marxism began to flourish. One major path of adaptations went from Marx to Lenin to Stalin and Mao. which is the path that we refer to as Marxism-Leninism. And the other major path went in a very different direction, and that began with George Sorel. Sorel was a heterodox Marxist who thought that it was too narrow to interpret the world through the lens of class and economics. And he thought that we should also look at sociology. So he thought that sociology would have an effect on the revolution. So he specifically thought that in order to create the ideological unity needed for the revolution, people would have to create mobilizing myths. These myths are stories that are supposed to contain all the strongest inclinations of a people, stories that people are inspired by and cherish and hold above criticism. The myth that Sorel chose was the myth of strikes. So Sorel tried to build up this mythology around the idea of strikes to get people to rally around the idea and to start the revolution. Italian fascists liked Sorel's ideas, but they adapted them. So to finish sketching out this path of adaptations, you have Marx, then Sorel, then Mussolini, and Hitler, which is the path of fascism. Although, unlike the path of Marxism-Leninism, by the time you get to Mussolini and Hitler, their ideas don't really resemble Marxism at all. And Hitler was even violently anti-Marxist, which is to say this is a messy chain of influences, and a lot of adaptation happened here. So to finish up the Marxist influence, fascists thought that Marxist movements correctly tapped into the spirit of mass politics. They told a simple story of a binary struggle between good and evil, where regular people were good and elites were evil, in particular financial elites. And within that, good people were deserving, especially deserving of political power. Hitler even tipped his hat to Marxism in that regard, saying, "No movement has operated with such a thorough knowledge of the characteristics of the masses as the Marxist movement," a point he elaborated on in Mein Kampf, saying, "The strong attractive power of the social democracy, yes, of the whole Marxist movement, rested in large part on the homogeneity and hence one-sidedness of the public it addressed. The more seemingly limited, indeed, the narrower its ideas were, the more easily they were taken up and assimilated by a mass whose intellectual level corresponded to the material offered," which in the context of Mein Kampf is actually kind of a backhanded compliment. He was arguing that this is a necessary component for a successful populist movement. But fascists thought that Marxist movements were fatally flawed and therefore likely to fail. To name a couple reasons why, they were inherently divisive. They turned one part of the population against the other, working class against property owners. And they also tended to be dogmatic. They tended to rigidly adhere to Marx's ideas, whether they worked in practice or not. So fascists thought that thinking that would work was wishful thinking, and they thought that something new had to be thought up. As Mussolini said in his autobiography, "It was necessary to imagine a wholly new political conception, adequate to the living reality of the 20th century, overcoming at the same time the ideological worship of liberalism, the limited horizons of various spent and exhausted democracies, and finally, the violently utopian spirit of Bolshevism." So they needed a galvanizing idea, an idea that crowds could rally around, something that excites people and binds them together. Something they thought wasn't doing that was internationalism. As Mussolini put it, "I saw that internationalism was crumbling. The unit of loyalty was too large." So he thought that internationalism wasn't an idea that people could feel passionate about and rally around. And here he is on the next page, following that to his conclusion. Facing this new situation, every political man, including myself, began to examine his conscience. The mere mention of this problem was sufficient to make clear and evident the hidden travail of national consciousness. I was transformed in my thought. So national consciousness replaced class consciousness and became fascism's Sorelian myth. As Mussolini said in his speech, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. It is a reality in the sense that it is a stimulus, is hope, is faith, is courage. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the
Make
nation."
America great
So
again.
what became the bottom of fascism,
Mega.
the mobilizing idea that became the bottom of fascist ideology,
Mega.
was a passionate nationalism.
Mega.
So Mussolini collaborated with a circle of Italian intellectuals,
And bankers.
notably around the magazine La Voce, and notably with the philosophy professor Giovanni Gentile. And they worked to develop a language and theory of fascism around nationalism, to turn nationalism into their mobilizing myth. And they did it by encouraging people to have a kind of mystical attitude about it. They said, if you close your eyes and you feel deep inside you, you can feel your nation down in your bones. You can feel the spirit of your country inside you. Here's Giovanni Gentile using that language. History is not a past that is of interest only to the erudite. It is present, alive in the soul of us all. Those who are Italians feel themselves a part of this Italy. They find themselves not only in the blue of its sky, in its hills and its water, nor only in the desolate or mountainous land that alternates with its fruitful plains and its smiling gardens. We close our eyes. Let us make abstraction from the horizons of its landscapes, so varied in beauty and light, and Italy remains in our soul. In fact, it enlarges and expands in the glory of that which it is. So they created this myth around the nation and treated it.
So that's what's this guy's name again? Ryan Chapman, and I would go to his site, right? And this is Fascism, an in-depth explanation. If you go Google it, yeah. And I would watch it. It's a very, very excellent, scholarly, specific, well-produced, and you get the picture, right? The next little thing we're going to go look at is the CIA.
Was also a competing and at times dominant ideology.
The history of the CIA in Italy,
the war,
1948.
the Axis occupiers had to.
Okay.
Although the Second World War was over in 19. European elites continued to fight a covert war to keep Western Europe under capitalist control and to secure allies in the growing Cold War. This effort was consolidated under the joint NATO and CIA operation titled Gladio, originally established as a stay-behind network of ardent right-wing fighters to repel a Soviet invasion. Gladio quickly morphed into an underground army of vanguard warriors, intent on crushing any left-wing activity in the Western sphere. This ominous operation, named after the Roman short sword of the same name, has continued to baffle researchers and skeptics for the past 3 decades, since its declassification in the early 90s. Although we still remain in the dark about many aspects of Gladio, we do know that the story largely begins in post-war Italy in 1948 by rigging Italy's first democratic elections since their fall to fascism in the 20s. Folks, today we begin in earnest to untangle the decades-long Operation Gladio by looking at its origins in Italy, its ties to the Vatican, and the establishment of confidential pan-European forums to administer this shadowy and dangerous web. Most importantly, we will be tracking the fingerprints of the U.S. intelligence apparatus, the CIA, who is all over this tangled and intricate web. Today, I plan on breaking from my usual format slightly. This will be part 1 of a new 3-part miniseries within the history of the CIA, exploring the origins of Gladio, the transatlantic organized crime networks that permeated this operation, the spooks and deep state weirdos that helped organize the whole gambit, and the significance of these post-war operations to our larger narrative. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome aboard. As I do in all my videos, I cite all my sources in the description of each part. When a number shows up at the top of the screen like this, you can find a matching bibliographic citation in the description, which will point you to where I found that info. I encourage you to check it out, as we are covering some very sensitive and often debated topics today. Well, without further ado, let's get into the origins of Operation Gladio and how the CIA stole the first post-war elections in Italy. Let's begin.
I will do my level best to stand up for freedom and democracy around the world by keeping the United States of America strong and by keeping our eyes wide open as we welcome change in the world by keeping our eyes wide open.
That's this website, Eyes Wide Open.
Before we begin to get into the early establishment of Gladio operations throughout Europe in earnest, I want to lay out a few disclaimers about this whole concept. To this day, we still do not have the full story of Operation Gladio. We have access to some primary sources that have been declassified, and we have been exposed to some leaks and inquiries across Europe about this program. Otherwise, however, as researchers, historians, and students, we are largely left with disparate pieces of a puzzle that I'm afraid we might never be able to fully solve. We know for a fact that yes, Gladio existed. NATO and the CIA operated secret anti-communist armies in Europe for the better part of the Cold War, and that major attacks in the West were likely orchestrated by these agencies. In August of 1990, as the Cold War was coming to a close, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, a harrowing figure of Cold War Italy and the Christian Democratic Party, having served as Prime Minister in 7 governments and 21 times as a minister, stood before the Italian Parliament and admitted bluntly that there had been secret armies across Europe and Italy, and that a report would be presented to the public detailing.
I'm not going to play this thing in total because no one's there watching it. But that's the question, you know. So all of this stuff is kind of right in your face, right? In the United States, we are tiptoeing around a collapse of monumental. I mean, to the point. I mean, the United States is not even what it says it is, right? Never was, you know. Never America never was great, right? Except for that handful of white, rich, moneyed, landed, powerful men, right? That's who wrote the Constitution. That's who showed up, you know, Christopher Columbus. That's who showed up. And they took, stole, killed, murdered, raped, pillaged the indigenous people and everybody else, their own citizens, who they brought over as indentured slaves. And if you don't realize you are an indentured slave at this minute, you know, to your your check, whether it's coming from government or it's coming from your employer, you are a slave, right? Now, I was a guy who danced between that, right? I never, you know, really had I only worked for people who needed me more than I needed them, which meant that I didn't work for them very long because, yes, they could put up with me for a limited amount of time because I was fulfilling a service that they could not do, could not find anybody else except this guy, you know, me, you know. And so and it was, you know, gave me a very interesting life, right? I traveled the world. I had amazing people in my life, amazing teachers, amazing mentors, amazing lovers, amazing comrades. And I did, you know, and say again, it wasn't me doing it, you know. I was just part of it. I was the dude, you know. And so, you know, I was part of many, many movements, right? The art movement of the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the political and environmental movement of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the esoteric movement of the, you know, and I always did my best to serve love's creation in every day and every way I took the piece of the earth and made it stronger. So I had a very relatively, you know, comfortable life. But, you know, if people looked at it, oh my God, he's living in an abandoned building. Oh my God, look at the place he's living out in the middle of the woods, you know. But it's, you know, beautiful. You know? It's really nice. And the things I do are, you know, interesting and okay, so this is kind of where, let's see, will it get bigger? This is where I live. Okay? And this is not even, this is like early spring. Right? It hasn't really leafed out into, you know, hasn't started flowering out. Right now, all of this is not only green like this, but it's covered in flowers, all kinds of bushes and anyway. But how can you live in the woods? Well, pretty easily because it's beautiful. I have a working toilet. I have running water. I have electricity. Those little creature comforts I do have. I have a comfy bed. In the man cave. I mean, it's small, and it's not like a 10,000 square foot, colossal house like my brother has, and he's in it all by himself. Well, I'm out in the woods, and my friends are the squirrels and the bunnies and the butterflies and the birds, right? And as the cockroaches from California and Florida and Texas and New Jersey and Charlotte, North Carolina are showing up, they're destroying it. And this place is so sensitive, so close to the Garden of Eden that it's dying very quickly. And and God has told me, okay, hey, what, you want to stay here another 20 years and watch the grass grow? No, you're going to go do something else, right? So I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to have to go out just for a moment. I'll be right back. Hey. So here's a little thing I helped put on called Universal Peace Day, right? Here is my mentor, right? Sensei. And here is, well, three of these guys are my mentor. This is a Japanese Shinto priest. This is a Jewish rabbi. This is a Hindu, Catholic, spiritual, amazing guy. Here's me. Here's Dave. We're organizing the homeless folk. Here's Christine Barton taking her on her only, well, I don't know if she's taking vacations now, but she hadn't taken a real vacation at all in her whole life. Just work, 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 work. She was the girl who invented the algorithm that gave us modern computer graphics, right? And unless you're a real, computer person, you don't know that. I mean, she started SIGGRAPH, which is Special Interest Computer Graphics Group for the IEEE, right? Here's a rainbow gathering, right? In upstate New York, in Trumansburg near Ithaca, right? Again, I was like thrown into, nobody wanted to do it. I went to a meeting. They all consented that I was the leader. They ran away, right? I was working with the Iroquois Nation, Grandfather David, when they were negotiating, because they rented the New York State to the Dutch. They didn't get conquered, right? They married into the Dutch families. That's why you go up there and you see the Iroquois Nation. They all look, blonde and blue-eyed, And so Grandfather David, so there was no national forests in New York. So we couldn't do a gathering there. But Iroquois Nation owned this, 1,000 acres. And he said, you guys can go use it. I trust you, Al. And so we did. Right? It took a gathering. By measure of most folks, probably the best gathering that was there. Now, I did not, single-handedly do it. No, I just kind of went there, looked around and prayed and kind of laid it out a bit. And then I brought in kids from Cornell and Ithaca College and in areas around. And we took this beautiful place and turned it into, let's get a picture. There's cows. And this were 6 big meadows, each about 300 acres. And they would just, grow stuff on it, and then like grass grow on it, and then like cows grow on it. And they just did that. Very, no big. So here's me living in the woods for a year in that tent. There's my truck. And I built a little dam and made that little swimming hole. Now, I didn't do all this all by myself, right? I had, first there was the scouts. Let's see if we have a picture of the scouts. Now, here's the mud people. This is my healing temple here. And here's some of the scouts, right? And I'd always have a rainbow sweetie, right? And I would let the girls fight over me until the one won out. And this young lady right here, and here she is right there, and there's her little boy, and she's Native American and Puerto Rican and a few other things. And he was the drummer for Joan Jett. Right? And so she looked at her little eyes of sweetness for me. And she was a hard-ass girl, meaning she was like dressing down this woman who was trying to be the Swami mommy because she was like being sweet on me. So if she was sweet on me, she could rule the world. Not so much. And here's the pond, yes. So about 15,000 people showed up to this gathering. They were heading to the west, and most of them stopped here and said, "This is nicer." This guy was my doppelganger. He had the same name I did, and he lived in San Francisco. And he would, we met I was in San Francisco, and I went to the Union Hall, and I gave him my name and said, "Oh, we got a guy named just after you." Kind of weird too. So I went, and that's. So. Okay, this is what my life has been, So about 20 years later, again, I'm in Roanoke, Virginia, and there's a place called Floyd, Virginia, which is up on top of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And a lot of people in the 70s, when they were going back to the country, went up there. And so there were some interesting people up there. And I met this guy, Chris, who did rock and roll. I was riding my school bus around doing demographics, and I would jump, I would find out, oh, there's going to be a festival. I'll go see that. So I met him selling food, right? Anyway, a few years later, I met him again in Roanoke, and he had hooked up with this woman who is the daughter of a really super rich guy from Charlotte. Was like a mobster, just went in with millions of dollars and just bought up stuff. So he bought up a good chunk of Floyd. So they wanted to put on a festival. So he had about a 600-acre farm right on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Right? And so this was it. And so he put a little camper, and I moved in, and I started to do my little thing, right? And And there's a road we built right up through the whole festival. Right? So I have a lot of experience building roads, right? Especially in organic environments, right? Not, doing what the state does, which is like a military thing. Like the interstate motifs in the United States, they are paid for by the Defense Department. They're called the interstate military highway. They're called the Eisenhower freeways, right? So this was a little farmy building that we ripped off one side. I mean, it's falling off, and built a real good stage on the inside. We left the funky building, farmy, barny part, and we put a stage there, right? And we made 7 stages. And that one little endeavor took so much effort. I said, we can't just build this kind of stuff. We have to be a little more creative. So everything we did in a creative, organic kind of way. Right? So what that says African camp, right? And the African. So here's the rest of the stages that we built were like this, right? And since I'm a theater guy, I said, we don't need to build the whole thing. We just need to make it look like what we want to portray, right? So it was like made out of just sticks, and bingo, it looks like the old time house is really there, but it's not. Right? And this was my mission statement for the whole place, right? But again, I didn't do all this work. I just would talk to people like these guys. So this is how big I was getting, right? That's a normal sized human. And this is me. And I still, before I died in 2014, this is 2003, I packed on another 140 pounds. These are the guys who put on the festival. So these are people who I actually met back in the day in New York in the 60s and 70s, and they moved to Floyd to go back to the country, and they were bus people too, right? And so I did things like, so there are a number of cemeteries on this farm. So I kind of made sure that no one was going to go camping on them. So I put fences around them and put flowers all over them. So, and here we are building the main stage. And here's the main downtown where the trading circle was, where all the vendors were. And here's the African Showboy. So Chris brought a bunch of people that he was taking around to other venues during the winter to build up the mo for the festival, right? And so he had a number of. So these guys came from Nigeria, and they loved it because as soon as they showed up, and so he had to kind of hide them. He couldn't keep them. He could take them to these shows, have the show, and then take them back here where people wouldn't see them. And so the first thing we did that first month of March and April was we gardened and we put flowers everywhere, and we stuck up this red fence to define what was going to be the festival site. That was what we did. And then other people, and then we would, when they weren't performing, we would have that Barney thing that I turned into a stage, built a real stage inside the barn and took off one side of the wall. We would have shows there every frigging weekend, parties, not shows, parties, right? And that's how we got the crew. By March, we were doing that. By end of April, early May, our May Day party, we had that was the Seed Camp party. We had about 40 people who were like excited about doing this, and and we had some people from Poland and different other places, Mexico and El Salvador, and so it was multicultural. And then there were guys, this guy and this girl, they were part of my esoteric school, and they, he picked up from Chris. Because Chris wasn't doing the food anymore, he stepped in and started doing that, and he just loved it. And so he became the primary seed camp cook, and also Chris and him and a few other people made a big food thing, right? Because you have 3,000, we have 3,000 people here, right? And these were amazing youngsters who were holler folk, and they were old timey. They were like reincarnation of old timey music people, and they made all those instruments. I mean, they weren't just playing them; they were into making them too. Right? And so the main stage for the first time out, basically. So we were, Chris had the realization that this was going to be a long time thing. They're still doing it, right? And so, but Dave, the electrician, who he had the license. I worked for him. I had worked for him, meaning I was never an employee. He would come and get me. I got this problem. Can you fix this for me, please? And he was always worrying, and he was always, as most contractors are, just on the edge of, going under. And so I'd always, he'd have these big jobs that he really wasn't fit to build or do. And he would, bring me in, and they were going to give him a big check if he pulled it off. So he'd pay me off pretty good, to make sure that the job happened. And this was my lifestyle. This is what I did, and for my whole life, and still do. Right? But now I'm, in my mid 70s, and I've died 7 times, and my body has been, racked. So I'm here no longer just to be the idle artist or the itinerant scholar or the griot. I'm here to serve God through His love's co-creation, and not as a religious character, not even as a theologian, but just a cheeky monkey to serve God. So again, and so this is Don of the Buffalo. So I knew this guy. I worked for back in the day at the Fillmore East. I was the ME, and I worked for Bob Goddard, who had Joshua Light Show and Pig Lights, and those became large entities, corporate entities. After Billy Graham and Bob died, they still existed. Billy was an amazing guy. He had the Fillmore East, Fillmore West, all these amazing bands that were coming up, like the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and et al. They'd be playing in bars, and he would go, you guys are great. I have a house that has 2,000 seats, right? I'm going to charge $5 a seat. I will give you the door after expenses, and I'm going to be putting a 8-track, 16-track recording studio in those places, and I'm going to make professional recordings of your show. I own the rights to that show. I own that tape, and I am going to produce them and put them out there into the market, which will make you world famous. So that night, instead of making $300 at the bar, you'll make $5 grand or 10 grand or 15 grand or whatever the house after expenses manifests. And and that's where the whole art scene of San Francisco and the Lower East Side kind of grew out of. Max, what's his name? Who did all he was like the, oh, who's the guy who had the factory? Andy Warhol. He was like the Andy Warhol of the flower power movement, something Max, right? And he did all these posters, right? Which are now, if I had kept all the posters I had from the Fillmore East, I probably could, I could read half the shit I had. Like I was there taking pictures of everything happening on the stage of the Fillmore East, right? I probably had, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 negatives of all of that. Right? And I took a little trip and I built my parents a house and I made a invisible secret closet where I stashed all my stuff that I thought was of value. And my father, unbelievably, unearthed my secret closet and threw it all away. Right? I was like, what? And pretty much my whole life has been that. Meaning I've been living like a millionaire my whole freaking life, like on $400 a month, right? And so God has been taking care of me in the most blessed of ways. But one of the things God has been protecting me from is not being not being Elon Musk, not being Bill Gates, not being any of those guys. Because I met Billy Boy back in the day of Xerox PARC, and he wasn't he wasn't like the monster he is today. And it's not Billy Boy's fault because he was used, right? Same with Elon. I mean, just look at Elon. When he first, was in PayPal, he looked like a cute little bunny. Now he looks like the devil incarnate, And anyone who gets into that, you pick any character. You look at even Donald Trump. I mean, he was because of his genetic background and his father and the life he grew up in, he was a pretty happy planning, but he wasn't what he is today, right? So I was been blessed because I've been protected. I've been, when you got nothing to lose, it's no big deal, So I've died 7 times, so I know that death's no big deal, right? And I keep getting brought back, so I can complete my what I was sent here to do, right? And all along having a really good time, and being part of other people's lives and helping them, become something more than we were. So here's a good picture. There's chemtrails in the 1970s. That's the first time I ever saw that. It was, I think, 1978. That might have been 73. 72 or 73 when I was out in the West. Out in the desert with Grandfather David. The keeper of... here are the boys. The boys. This doesn't show the girls of Potato Wolf. But these are the boys. Adam, whatever his name is, and these 2 guys. And these 2 guys went on to make... he became a college professor. And these 2 guys started the MTV. Right? And then they kind of sold out to the guys who really took MTV to what MTV became. But they were they were doing it like we did, Potato Wolf on Manhattan Cable, right? On Channel C. And these 2 guys, she's one of my sweeties, nice Jewish poetess. This girl was going to be the national poet of Israel. So I was, I had a rabbi teaching me. I was part of a Lubavitcher to become a rabbi. My rabbi, because I lived in his loft building in Williamsburg. I had this 17,000 square foot loft. I came back from one of my world journeys and I picked up the Village Voice and said, you know, Soho artist looking for a loft, call this number. And I said, that's me, because Soho had already blinged out into yuppiedom, and none of us were there anymore. So I called the number. I said, he goes, you an artist? You a Soho art? I said, yes, I am. He goes, oh, you want a loft? Yes, I do. Well, I'm busy right now, but tomorrow I'm in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. All you have to do is take the J&M train over to Williamsburg Bridge and get off the first stop, Marcy Avenue, come down to Broadway, walk 2 blocks, go on to Roebling, walk all the way down to South 9th Street, and where they're building Roberto Clemente. And as you're going on the bridge, you will see a fire, right? That's where I'll be. I said, oh, you're dealing with a fire today? He goes, oh, no, it's not started yet. But how do you know it's going to be? Don't worry. Just as you're going over on the subway, look down towards the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and you will see a fire, and that's where I'll be. I'll give you the heads up where I am at. I said, okay. So I did, and so come around 1 o'clock, right? So I come there to about 1 o'clock, and I going over the subway. I see the fire. I get off at Marcy. I walk down and walk, Broadway, then, Roebling's, and then there it is, South 9th Street, and there's the burning building. It's like the burning bush, right? There's this rabbi, black coat, black hat, the payos, the beard, the curly fries on the side. And Rabbi, yes, are you the artist? Yes, I am. I said, that's not the building I'm supposed to live in. He goes, no. And there's a fire chief there. There is a guy in a suit there, and another guy in a suit, right? And they are I'm right there. He goes, just wait a minute. And he pulls out of his pocket 3 envelopes. Gives one to fire chief, one to this suit, one to that suit. Shakes their hands. He goes, okay, let's go. And I was like, what was that? And Rabbi said, oh, that's called Jewish lightning. That's the first time I ever heard that, right? And I said, okay, this is 1975, I guess, right? So he shows me this loft. It's like gigantic building, takes up a whole block, and all the buildings around it are burnt crisp, right? And over here they're building this brand new spanking housing project called Roberto Clemente, right? And so and just 2 blocks that way is the East River, and all of these refineries, sugar refineries, beer refineries. That's what a beer factory is. It's a refinery. That's what a sugar factory. It's a refinery, right? And so I'm looking at all this, and there's no one there, right? And right across the river is, Manhattan. It's kind of where I'm looking over right at where I do live at the time. This is when I had my my healing temple in the belfry of Edison's original powerhouse for Wall Street, right on Pearl Street. It was on Pearl that ran right into Wall Street, right 3 blocks up, and right where that place was on Pearl Street, there were 4 big lots, parking lots, right? That there was no building. It's just 400 cars, right? And that's where the rich guys who went to Wall Street parked their cars, right? Well, now in those lots are 60-story gigantic buildings, right? Where now the rich people live in these 60-story condos, right? Which is each floor is one gigantic apartment that's worth $20-30 million, right? And so But that's not when I lived there. When I was there, after 7 o'clock, there was no one in Wall Street area. No one. There, no restaurants, no nothing. There was one kind of diner that would open up around 6 to have breakfast and would close around 4. And there was one. Oh, there was 3 places, but they were like private clubs, right, for the really rich folk, right? Like trading places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. That private club was one of those clubs. Anyway, and that gave you the perfect idea of what the frack went on down there. So I was living there, and I had my healing temple. I was at the height of my alternative medicine guy, right? I had been at the VA. The VA had sent me to study alternative medicine with all kinds of great teachers. That's where I met my sensei. That we built the Hambu up in Putney, Vermont, and then I went and did studied Chinese medicine. I studied Santa Maria, kind of medicine of the Caribbean, and which is African. And that's why I'm African American. That's melanin challenged, and so and that's just me at so 70. That would be 75. I was 25 and 75. So I'd done like 7 lives already by the time I was 25, right? And I knew. I'd worked on the World Trade Center. I knew what was coming for all those beautiful places I lived. Like when New York City went bankrupt, they actually went bankrupt in '68, but it really didn't take, the rubber didn't hit the road until 70, 71, 72. Right? And I left college in 70, and I was just hiding from my draft board because the war was still going on in Vietnam, and I didn't do anything to break the law. I didn't burn my draft card I just if they sent me anything, I was he was just here. I don't know where he is now. He's moved. I didn't stay in any one place. I kept moving around, and so I lived down before I got to Pearl Street place. I lived in the park at the Battery, right at the tip. That's where the Dutch and then the English and had their artillery. So when boats came into the Hudson, they could blow them out of the water. So and now it's a nice little park, right? And it's where the Staten Island Ferry thing is. It's where the tunnel that goes to Brooklyn is. It's where the Men in Black's little aluminum building is. And Wall Street and all the banking buildings are all around it. And when New York went bankrupt, they didn't pick up the garbage. They used to have 30,000 cops, and they fired them all, and they only had 8,000. When people talk about defund the police, well, New York, you can see what happens when you do that. New York was that from 1970 to 2090. New York was in the crapper. Right? People talk about violence and crime and blah blah blah. Not even close. Right? And so, and there were thousands of guys from Vietnam who were totally junkies, who were just bouncing around the streets because there was already a community of hobos over there on the Bowery, and the Mole people were, had been deeply ensconced in the bowels of New York, and all of that was kind of going on, And did you ever see Judge Dredd with Sylvester Stallone? They unfreeze him, and he has to put down a rabble, and they go underground, and that's what New York was then. The Mole people lived down there, right? So these are my diabetic eyes. They kind of look kind of tired from seeing all the things I've seen. And that was 1971, right? 1971. After I, you know, basically did that, so I'm sitting in. I walked down um, Varick Street, um, uh, or Hudson. I was walking down Hudson, and there is right at Canal. There are these places where the the garbage people would throw their garbage, and then it would get bulldozed onto a barge, and then taken out to the Atlantic Ocean and just dumped there. And they would anything, right? So I used to go through that, on Thursdays, and because the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is kind of when they would bulldoze it onto barges and take it out because there was nobody around to really see it. I mean, the garbage pile built up from Monday till Thursday was when all the good stuff was still there. So I was going through it this one day, and there was no fence. No, you could just walk straight off of West Street onto these docks and go through the garbage. Right? I didn't care. And all of my furniture, all of my appliances, my TVs, not so much the clothes. I got that other places, but anyway, one day I'm going through that, and there is and dome tents are just starting to show up. Very expensive, very cutting edge, and I'm going through it, and there's this box picture of a dome tent, and it's I open it up, and it looks like if at all been used once, right? It's still in its nice little bag, and wow. So I kind of take it out of the cardboard box, and it's got a nice little thing that you can put over your shoulder and start pile stuff I'm gonna have. So there's the tent. Next thing is some electric stuff, and I always am collecting electric stuff because part of my shtick as an electrician in New York was that I could rebuild something that was old to still look like it was old, though it would, act as if it was new, right? So I could fix it and make it look just like it used to look back in the 50s, right? So no inspector or whatever would go, oh, what's this is new work? No one filed this. Anyway, so that was one of my shticks. And so any electric stuff, okay, so that and then oh look, I also find this like kind of very bizarre gigantic backpack, but it's not like what it was like something you could stick a 55-gallon drum and put it on your back. It was like gigantic stuff. So, oh, good. Look, I can put all this stuff in there. So I put electric stuff, and I find a nice kind of thumpy hammer and a few other tools. And this has turned out to be a good garbage day. And then I see this frigging weed whacker, right? And again, this is something relatively new, and I get it, and I'm looking at it, and I open up the little thing, and it's got gasoline in it, and it says there's oil in the other one, and I go, it's got little instructions on how to use it on the side. I read those, and so I pull the cord a couple times, and it starts right up. I was like, this is freaking amazing. So I put that in the bag, and so I don't put more than I can carry, and so I put everything in the backpack, and I start, walking towards, Hudson Street, then walking down Hudson towards Chambers, and then I walk down Varick all the way down to the park. Right. So and the other thing I found in there was a box of sandwiches. Yeah, they've been around a while, but they weren't moldy. So I get that, and there was some bottles of soda pop that were still sealed. So I got lunch. I got all this great stuff. I go down to the park. there were a few books there, so I'm looking at the books, and I think a box of pens. And so, I'm like, this was a good haul. So I walk from that garbage thing, Canal Street, a little bit above Canal Street, probably a mile, right? So I walk from west, then I get on Hudson, then I get Chambers and Varick all the way down to the park, right? So, because I could have stayed on west, but the highway comes down, and then I'm like having to dodge trucks and cars. So at the point where the highway became West Street, I went over to Hudson, walked down Hudson to Chambers to Varick, Varick to the park, right? So I'm sitting in the park, in the middle of the park, and by this time, New York has really gone bankrupt. So they're not cutting the grass, they're not really the only people collecting the garbage are the private collectors, right? So Manhattan is semi collect, not uptown, not over unless you're rich, you're not getting your garbage taken. And that's why so much good stuff. So it was terrible for everybody. For me, it was great because the garbage got better and better to go through. And what was truly interesting, just really not many, only how I learned about that was from the mole people, right? The mole people told me, "Hey, you got to see this garbage here." And so, because I used to go down to the mole people, and this is when I was, learned to become the alternative healer, and I was like the closest thing they had to a hospital, you know. And so people were like had serious infections and really nasty shit, and they couldn't even go to the emergency room, right? And people, oh my god, So I was down there doing that, and that's how I got taken down there because when I was at NYU, so I went to all from a very young age, from like 16, I used to go hang out in colleges and go to lectures and go talk to professors, and because I wanted to know stuff, right? I didn't want to just go to high school. I went to a very prestigious high school. I went to school with the richest people on earth, and I played it that way. There were, I went to school with Eddie Merrill, Ricky Lynch, Joseph Kennedy was my roommate. I met Robert, Senator Robert Kennedy and all the Klan. I mean, I could have endeared myself to all of that, but I didn't. The cockroaches. I can't walk anywhere. And they have all these vehicles. I mean, they have, 18 vehicles, and they don't have one really good one. Right? And it's like a military compound, right? Anyway, so I would hang out, and how I first started hanging out, my parents lived in this place called the Manhattan House. It was right on between Park and Lex, right across from Hunter College. And we were on the 21st floor, and from my parents' little deck, you could look right down into where the gymnasium was and watch the girls playing basketball. And they could also look right into the shower room, right? And the girls knew this, and they would put on a show for me. They'd see me because I was just like across the street. I was like 100 yards, if that. And they would put on and this Hunter was an all-girl school, so they would be doing all-girl things. It was kind of, And so I would get excited, and they would watch me get excited, and that would get them excited. And then they would put up little signs like, meet us out front in 40 minutes. That's when I was about 15. So, and that wasn't misogyny. That was, totally unilateral. And I would bring them back to my parents because this place was, my father was just had this thing about being a millionaire. So he basically lived in this apartment that was like for millionaires. It was on the 21st floor, and it had 2 working fireplaces, right? It had 3 restaurants that, part of your rent, you could go and have meals there. On top, there was a clubhouse. but nobody used it because they were so rich. They had their other clubhouses. This was just put there by the architect. So nobody was up there. So the Hunter girls and I would bring them in, because I knew everybody, right? I knew I'd been there for 4 years, and I, gave everyone, and all the rich people there treated everyone who worked there. I mean, they had an automatic elevator. You know, the kind of elevator you go in, you push the button, it takes you to the floor. They had that kind of elevator, but they had an elevator operator because the rich people were too good to push the button, right? Plus, they had service elevators because they didn't want deliveries to come in the same elevator that they were in, right? And they had the whole, your big apartment. You had a kitchen. You had a little room for your help to live in. And my parents put my grandma there, and there was like an intercom in that maid's room. And they had because they had three restaurants and a few other things. They had their own laundromat, so you could, push the laundry button, and they had bags that you put there, and it had this little thing you filled out how many shirts, how you wanted them starched, all that, and so I would, in later years when I wasn't living at my parents, I would come there every Friday, and my grandma would be making eggplant parmesan and some other stuff my mom would be baking, and I would show up around 3 and help them cook and have a good time, because when I was with my grandma and my mom, they got along great and laughed and kidded around and had a grand old time. So they loved it that every time, and I brought my mom flowers every single time, and I brought my grandma a new book to read, right? And so that was the latter part of the 70s. And I guess I moved in there in 67, I guess, 67 maybe. Yeah. And 17, maybe 66, I was 16. It's like they're always on the move. They come in, they go out, they come in, they go out, they come in, they go out. And again, they're a metaphor to what's going on to the average American who's skitsed out about being here, right? 1 hour and 12 minutes. How much juice do we have left? Oh, I got about another 20 minutes. So the Hunter girls, right? So I wouldn't bring them in the main lobby. We'd go in because Hunter on Lexington, the underground parking for these apartments, and there was because not everyone, if you wanted to go out into Lexington, it was a lot easier to go and get what you call it, the service elevator looked just like the elevator that you went on to go to your front door. It was just a little bit bigger. So, and the doors that open so if they were moving furniture in or something like that, and it wasn't like covered in gold, but it was like anybody else's elevator. So a lot of people, if they wanted to go down Lexington, because there were a lot of nice stores on Lexington, right, and Madison, and if they wanted to go that way, it was a lot easier to just walk out your kitchen door, go to the service elevator, and they take you down to not just the basement, or if you're going to go to your car, you would go through the service elevator, right? But they also had one that went right out onto the street, right? A door that went out into the street. And they had a doorman there too. But the average, because the lobby of this place was like a hotel, this big, expansive, long marble floor, everything gold, gigantic windows lit up, a big garden, that you could hang out in. No one did. I did, And once the girls really started twigging on me and realizing, well, yes, this guy is like 4 or 5 years younger than we are, but he is cool, and he knows all these people, some places to go and things to do, and And he's so much more interesting, and he reads books, and he knows poetry, and he takes us to jazz clubs, So, 16, 17, the Hunter girls were and they treated me like I was one of the girls that had special equipment, and that I was not, they kept saying, you're not a guy. You're somebody I can relate to. You're like one of my sisters, but you got special equipment. You know how to use it. And you're loads of fun. And you're always so attentive to us and to me. And, whenever it's one of us all by ourselves, you were like, I'm the only person that exists. And that's how I relate to people in general. I'm, the story ain't about me. It's about you, And that's been, my grandma brought me up that way, and all the folks who initially, Mamo and all the people in Harlem who were my initial people who gave me insight onto the human race, between the ages of 0 and 6, like, and that's why I am a African American that is melanin challenged, I have that same kind of outlook. And if you look at, and that's why people are so bent out of shape about, cancel culture, because white people are boring and stupid, right? And vicious. And so you look at Washington, D.C., it wasn't built by white people, it was built by black people. Why it is so groovy of a place? Those guys were amazing artisans, So, um, and the other thing about the Hunter girls, which was kind of fun, and this I've learned this about women, and most of my relationships are kind of this way, in that women want your attention, but they don't want you around all the time. Since I went to prep school in New Hampshire, right on the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, I basically, I'm right in the foothills of Mount Washington there. I was gone, but that we were there. It was like prison for rich kids, meaning our school started end of September, and we did not leave until Thanksgiving. We went to school 7 days a week, even on Sundays, right? And so we got all the time that the state of Massachusetts said you had to be in school. We had this block from September to Thanksgiving, and we had Thanksgiving off from Thanksgiving all the way through December to the second week of January. And then from the second week of January till May 10th, we were there 24/7, 7 days a week. We went to school. So, we went through school real intense, and our classes, we had no more than 7 kids in a class. So and we had some really amazing teachers. I had 5 amazing teachers, and we lived with them, right? So it was almost like the Platonic school, right? It was like being taught by Plato and Aristotle. Now we had some real, I had this guy. I'm trying to learn French from. There was his husband and wife team. They were older than dirt. They were the headmaster's friends when he taught at Deerfield. What was his name? Salcone or something. But they were so, they were, what do you call it when you're not there and old? You have, starts with a D. But anyway, this one lady who was trying to teach, and we were trying to learn French from, she was just, forget about it. And we used to go and get reams of paper and ball them up and crawl under, because we were sitting at a big table, right? Like a boardroom, and she'd be in the middle. And one of us would drop something, go down, and just stuff paper into her dress between her legs until her legs were wide apart. And then there was one of us who was quite artistic with paper, and would roll this thing up in a certain fashion that it would represent, and squeeze it right up there, up in there, that little sensitive part between your legs. And then the rest of the paper was just stuff that kind of pushed up against that artistic piece. And she would get to a point, she'd instead of be going, "Ah, ah, 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 ah," we did that every day. And then the bell would ring and she'd be going, "Ah, ah, 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 ah," and we would get up and just walk out because she couldn't. Her legs would be spread apart so much by all the paper we stuff up her dress that. And we virtually did that every single day, right? And she had 3 classes in that whole day. And so people got thinking she's having a stroke or something. And then, when they would realize and pull the paper out, she would, "No, stop, no, stop." And that's when she said, "No, no, I want that. You leave that there." Ah, ah. This is the world I grew up in. And so here's me at the United Nations. And this was the I started an NGO in '72. We came out of Cooper Union. Right? Cooper Union had a very interesting department called Alternative Technologies. We started in '68, and that's when I was there. '68, summer '68, I was there. And then I had to go to prep school. I was going to college, but where I finished prep school, right? And so, and I was the first class. That department was truly amazing the first 2 years, and that's when I was there. And about 2 years later, when was it? 74, 74. When I came back from New Mexico, I spent 2 years in New Mexico working in the nuclear biz, working in places like Los Alamos, San Diaz, Kirkland Air Force Base, and Area 51. And, Popos and Air 51 is just a cover story for the ones they don't tell you about. And that whole mountain range is just full of shit. Anyway, so these guys, this is Mr. Brown, this is Preston Nichols. Oh, this is a guy from Canada who came down, and so we were all. This is the devil, Satan himself, right there. And here is my sweetie, my training wife, Donna Ann McAdams. There she is, right there. And this is in the United Nations. And we had a conference in 1984, I guess it was, because out of this NGO that we started called Alternative Technologies, that we did some pretty amazing. My whole concept, a mission statement of that NGO was that we were going to take technology and take it to a point that made it so simple any person could use it. Didn't have to be an expert, and it would save people's lives. Right. So the first thing we did, and the people we work with, everybody. That's when I realized the UN was a piece of crap. It was all about keeping the white males in power. That whole that it's a total fascist thing. That thing I was telling you earlier on about fascism. That was the United Nations. Still is. And somebody who knew me from back in the day at Cooper, and then knew me from the mystery schools when I was in the Thule Society and the Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, and a few other secret societies in New York, the Blue Door, the Green Door. Because of the 9 doors, there were a number of esoteric entities, mystery schools in New York. I kind of revolved around Weiser's book publishing, right? And And that was the beauty of New York. There was every kind of amazing thing going on there, right? So I was part of that through Madame Olga Kluver. She had her, curiosity shop on Lexington Avenue, 38th Street, I think it was. And it was it was where Bigfoot would come and buy his clothes. It was a dimensional. She had an imaginary mirror. Her whole storefront was almost this whole block on Lexington, and it was built in the 18 somethings, and it was just a beautiful. It looked like Germany, right? And she went in there, and I don't know if you've ever seen Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, and they have one of what's his name's paintings of water lilies, right, on there. And he did it for the front window, right? And the front window, instead of a flat piece of glass, it's a curved piece of glass, so you see no reflections. So you think you can walk right into the water lilies off of 50 whatever street that is, right? And that where MoMA had been where the New York Armory was. And that's where Billy Kluver, my mentor from the Council on Foreign Relations, who started the Automation House, basically in the 30s or 20s, brought modern art to the United States. So that was my mentor. Right? And Automation House was basically the thing that was bringing. I mean, the first place I ever saw a laser in 1950 whatever, 57, 58, was in Automation House. And it was in the CFR building right on Lexington. It was just up the street from Hunter. And I used to walk up that, I guess it's 69th Street, I think. And I would walk up that street and take my dog Dandy to the park. And we'd go right by Automation House. It was this big glass window that had this kind of, so you looked in and you saw this wild stuff in there, like there was no door to go through, right? And I would just be like, every time, me and my dog, he would sit there going, and I'd be there going, and then he kind of pull his leash going, come on, we got to go. I got to go. So we'd go to the park, and I never held his leash. He held it in his mouth because he was a Labrador, and he walked himself, and he had better street manners than I did. And so, and I was about, how old was I? Maybe 17, maybe somewhere between 15 and 17. We were doing this, and this guy, big tree behind me, said, kind of interesting, isn't it? I said, yeah, but how do you get in there? He goes, you just walk in. I said, there's a thing here. You can't, you can't see it, but look, I'll put my hand here. And I went to put my hand there, and I fell into the place. He had turned off whatever that barrier was. So when I put my hand to show that there was this invisible barrier that keeps you from going in there, I went, whoa. My dog looked up at Billy and just came over. He kind of picked me up. And it's the first time I ever heard this one. He goes, why do you think we fall down? And I'm like, amazed that I'm inside this place. And my dog is like, Rrr. And he goes, to get up. And he helps me up. And so he starts showing me around. So, hi, I'm Billy Kluver. This is my little playground. And that's what he calls it, my little playground. And I have it open to the public because I want the people to see, have the opportunity for them to see what is available. And this was stuff that's not even available today, right? So that's how I got, brought into that scene, right? So, here we are. And so this is in the 80s, and a bunch of these guys, through all that philosophical stuff, all that technology stuff, all that special stuff, I met these guys. And we started a group, our own group, called the U.S. Psychotronic Society, right? And where is this guy? This guy. This guy right here. He was a Nazi straight up, couldn't get any more Nazi. This guy was the guy I met in '68 at Duke University, that they were experimenting, making super soldiers, right? And this guy, so this is 1984, 1968. He looked exactly like that, right? Just like that guy. Kind of like you couldn't get any more plain Jane than that. But how old does he look? Somewhere between, 40 and 50, right? So I once asked him about this time, how old are you? No, I didn't say that. I said, when were you born? And he said, in 1888. This guy. And he was part of Daimler's, the Nazis had their own version of DARPA. And that's where DARPA came from the Nazi version. And they were all Nazis. This guy was the number one boy in Operation Paperclip. More important than Werner von Braun, because you never heard of this guy, right? And here's another one of his boys. These guys are all like, 90 to 140, and this is me. I'm in the UN. I'm running running a special research group that was part of our NGO, the Alternative Technology Group. And in that group, right, when we did it in, I guess, 72, when I got back, when did I get back? 74? Yeah, 74. I did that, right? And it wasn't just me. It was these guys from Cooper and these Nazi boys, and they had twigged on us when we were doing our 10th Street project. And that's when we realized, that, and it wasn't Jimmy Carter that started wind, the government looking at wind generation. They were looking at it earlier. And so we were looking at it. And so we did, what do you do when you do research? You go see what other people have done before you, right? And one of the things the pinwheel generator was not the height of technology. The Dutch, who had been using wind generation way before the steam engine, they got really good at it. And so they just didn't have these big, tall buildings with sails on them that, so they could grind. No, they perfected the wind generator by having it shaped like a barrel and the vanes all the way around, and it would do it flat on the ground. So you'd have instead of having to have gears all over the place, you would have the straight torque going into whatever you were doing for energy, right? Grinding stuff, running a loom, whatever, right? And so that's what they did, like in the 1790s, right? So we saw that. So we started playing around with it. And we found that was unbelievable, because the wind up, 100 feet up in the air, where they have the pinwheels or higher, there's a vortex there, and there's a really fast wind up here and a really strong wind down below, and that's why sailing ships worked so well, because they weren't like 300 feet up in the air, or right on the sea, so they were getting a straight on wind. So you stick your wind generator in that wind fluid straight on, and having this singular torque going down. Pretty amazing. So we made these barrels, that were like, we basically found a barrel Cooper in the Bronx, right? That made barrels, wooden barrels for like olives and food and wine, and we said, hey, we want this. What do you think? Can you do that? And the guy goes, yeah, I think I can. What I'll do is I'll just take one of my 55-gallon barrels, and then I'll use that as the foundation to build your wind vane thing. And he did a very good job. And we put a level, we kind of filled the barrel with different things. We tried sand, we tried concrete, we tried water, we tried a lot of different mediums because by having that weight and getting it going, that made torque like you couldn't believe. So these barrels are 55-gallon drum barrels. We were basically creating, somewhere between 1 and 20 kilowatts of electricity. And that's enough electricity to run a couple of houses, right? Totally electric, not just lights, but everything, right? Electric stoves, electric this, electric that, right? And the other thing that we really got interested in is taking that excess electricity and how do you store it? Batteries? No. We turned that electricity into hydrogen and oxygen, right? And the oxygen, we had this company that sold it to hospitals, right? Hydrogen, we were using it to heat spaces and to heat water because hydrogen is no more volatile than natural gas. It's about the same BTUs. The problem with hydrogen is because it is so light, it wants to escape. So you have to have a vessel that can hold it under pressure. So it won't, and have a medium, like a place where you can have the valve that it can't escape through. I mean, this stuff can, if you have a threaded piece of pipe, it can escape through that little teeny micro spaces between the threads, right? So, that's, so we were doing that in 1968, 69, right? And then because of that, a few of us were brought, in our, exposure, my exposure through rich people in this prep school, and that I wasn't a rich guy, but I hung out with all these, and I would go to their homes and I talk to their fathers, and I'd be talking about all this stuff, and they'd be going, "Whoa, how come my son isn't as smart as you are?" Oh, he is, just in a different way, and that's another thing that these guys and their parents and their especially grandmas loved about me is that I never talked squat about anybody, and I only built up their sons in the most positive ways. Boy, he's a good example. So a number of these guys said, Al, we want you to come to work for us, and I did. That's what this NGO thing was at the UN. So that was one of my first big, and also that I got brought into all these mystery schools, right? Now the problem was I wasn't a guy I wasn't going for the glory for myself, right? I wanted this for the betterment of mankind, right? And I was totally logical. There was no real place where I could get excited over accomplishing something, an idea, a project, but and I could get excited about having a good time with someone I cared about. But that wasn't like how these guys kind of thought and felt. And they thought it was endearing. They thought it was interesting. They thought it was, it's, good we have Al, and good there's only one of him. We can use him because we can't manipulate him. We can't push him around. We can't do any of that because he will always just come straight at us, and he won't. He's relatively diplomatic, but he is straight, talks truth to us. We kind of need that, but we don't want it. So that has been my life's motif. Right? Well, we're getting close to where I'm going to have to bail out. So 1 hour, 39 minutes. So I think at 1 hour, 44 minutes and 44 seconds, I will kind of go out. So anyway, we did this conference, right? And we showed 0 point energy. See here, I think I have. So we had all these conference of really smart people from all over the world, and putting the equations on how to do it on the board, plus we had, our little show and tell, and we were the first people. The World Wide Web had just been done, right? The guy in Stanford had just plugged it in, and so everybody in the world could. And so we were one of the first people to do a global. And so this like little study thing and this little lecture thing and this little discussion-y thing wasn't just in the UN. It was across the frigging globe. And we had Russia plugged into it, and you name it, we had it plugged in there, right? And this guy was Satan. I mean, he really, really, really was, right? Because I had met him a number of times, and he'd never friggin' changed. Like I said, everyone's wearing suits. I'm running the show. And where do you think the guy, the stand-up comedian got the idea to look like this? In Ukraine, right? That was my uniform, basically. T-shirt, right? And Julian, this guy, brilliant guy, physicist and king of Namibia or some place in Africa. And that's why he was an amazing diplomat. And he really thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. So he kept putting me at all these different conferences to be the, what do they call it? The cornerstone speaker, the first guy to like set the tone of the thing. And after I just, spoke truth to power a few too many times, they said, okay, that was it. And that was kind of it about that whole scene, because what happened to all these people, we got absorbed into DARPA, right? And pretty much everyone got wiped, meaning everyone got something stuck in their chin. Go read, Preston Nichols' The Montauk Project. And whether you believe it or not, it's a good explanation or a good definition or a good showing of what that whole scene is like, right? That whole CIA, whole DARPA, whole, as what's his name? What do you call him? Breakaway civilization. And if you don't realize that, in the last 200 years, since Albert Pike started the Illuminati, and the Illuminati is just the poster boy. That's not it. It is just the thing that everyone, oh, look at that, and that's why it was unearthed. It was put there by the aristocrats to be the loyal opposition, because they were building something deeper and darker underneath. Right? And everything you hear, like that's why Donald Trump's so interesting, because you look at everything he says 180 degrees from what he says. It's kind of what the truth is. Like Giuliani said on Fox when he told that poor guy nuts, what don't you understand? There is no truth. Give that guy a cigar. And that thing I played for you earlier on about, the fascists and the gladiator thing of the CIA. Come on, guys. It's never too late to wake up. I mean, we are like right here. The shit pond we're standing is right here, and still it's not too late, right? And if you kind of have the life I had, so here's a good example of my art, right? And art guys would. Here's some more art. There's another art show. It was a 10-year period where I was very prolific. I was in Soho, and I just had my loft, and I just kept knocking out every kind of art you could think of, right? Film, painting, sculpture, performance art, you name it. I did it, right? And I was the poster boy for the NEA of that avant-garde, right? Because I just put it out there without having to put me out there. And that's why guys like Keith Haring did that. There were a number of people who did that. Julian Schnabel, they just kept putting it out and kept changing their thing, right? Now, Keith was much better. He was like our generation's Andy Warhol. But he died of AIDS. And Julian was still is. I'm still think he's alive. I'm not sure whether he is or isn't, but he came from a relatively well-to-do. I mean, he didn't have to worry about it. I mean, most of the people who made it in the art world or were in the art world really didn't have to worry about paying the bills. I mean, they would have jobs and stuff, but it was more, why do you have a job? It's not to pay the bills. It's to interact with the human race. Right? I mean, that's why I worked. I mean, yeah, but I mean, I did, like I said, before I died in 2014, I had a gig, for almost 10 years where I worked for the desperate corporate lawyers, where I would navigate and investigate and negotiate problems they had. And they paid me extraordinarily well and put me in a, a forget 4-star hotel, 5-star hotel, and basically they lived that lifestyle of unbelievable hedonism, for about 10 years. And I was moving into it about 8 years before it. When I was the last 5-8 years of my career as the itinerant scholar, I had gotten up high on the food chain, so I was being brought in, paid well, let to do whatever I did that they wanted me to do, and would put me in, and I'd be in a place that was kind of interesting, and so I would be there and I'd stay there. After I finished the project, I'd stick around, whether it was in Brazil, whether it was in France, whether it was in Boise, Idaho, wherever it was, I'd hang because I would get myself in a place because I'd have to be there for, somewhere between 3 months and a year. And I would get a momentum of whatever I was doing. And I'd have money in the bank and I wouldn't spend a lot of money, but I'd have a pretty good time. I mean, that's what I did up in Ithaca. I mean, that's how I did that rainbow gathering because for a whole year, I didn't work. I just did that. That's why it was such a great gathering. And again, I didn't do that work. I didn't, yes, I dug my, share of holes and moved stone and did, when nobody else was around to do it and need to be done, I'd do it. But if I saw somebody else who could learn something from doing it and become a better person for them, I wouldn't say, here, let me show you, get out of the way. I'm going to do it. No, I'd say, okay, this is what we got to do. This is how it can be done. This is how I would do it. You don't have to, you can figure out a better way of doing it. Do it. It's all yours. I'm putting you in charge. I mean, I had the auspices, not the authority, but the auspices to say, I'm putting you in charge, right? And the people who had the authority would say, oh, wow, okay, well, let Al do this because at the end of the day, I'll take the credit for it. Al doesn't need it. He don't want it. And that's why I do this show, to give you, the audience, the opportunity to have a life that you don't have now, but you could. And if you had that life, you would make the world better to a point where we would all be moving forward. Right now, we're not. And the inertia for us to move forward is so strong because we're in the Aquarian age and God's love is here presently 100%. And in that picture of the UN guy and there's Satan, there were so many people moving the world forward that Satan's presence, he was a positive influence. And that's the interesting thing about Satan, right? He was the number one boy of God, right? And so he's still kind of number one boy of God. Whereas Jesus is God, right? That Trinity thing is quite interesting because God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost or Spirit, whichever you want to use, is God, right? But they're three separate entities, but they're all God, right? And Satan is that loyal opposition, right? And the only sin there is the unplugging from God's love. That's fornication, right? All the other stuff is just you being a moron, right? And so that's why it's important that you read this book. Whoops. Right? Because this book is not a legal document. This book is not a owner's manual. This book is a influencer. This book is a thing that you read it and you feel it in your heart. It motivates you to move forward in God's co-creation and love's co-creation. And, people don't like to talk about it, but I'm going to be talking about it in church because my old buddy is going to be talking about Moses and him meeting up with a burning bush. And so I'm going to tell him my story about the burning. Moses didn't want to even think about going back to Egypt. After he got dissed so bad, that he only did it because the burning bush says, "Don't you want to know who I am?" And so that was like he couldn't help himself. Yeah, who are you? And he did not answer, "I am who I am," which only Popeye says. He says, "I am a work in progress, and you, Mr. Moses, are my reflection." And that's what the human race is. We're God's reflection. His child made in his image and likeness. And now if that ain't a reflection, I don't know what is, So I hope you enjoyed the show. I would love some kind of feedback. It would have been nice if we had a little chatty poke, but there's nobody here. But I know most of you folks go watch this later. And depending on right now, the weather's nice. I'm gonna go do some house cleaning because I live out in the middle of the woods. So you do your house cleaning when it's not raining, and the sun ain't like microwave. So this is perfect time to. I haven't really had. This has been my breakfast, so I need something like oatmeal, more substantial. So that's it. Anyway, hope you're doing good. Oh, I went way past 1 minute, 44 minutes and 44 seconds. Now 1:52:05. How much time are we at? Oh, we got to go.